know. She met the lady and I forgot the lady's name.
Would you like to contradict her? Thank you. We're all set there. Ready for storytelling. I'm depressed. This is not the real mermaid. You know he's going to walk. Yeah, I just like have said that. Yeah, on tour. My husband is very fond.
I can't believe you're sitting on the
Oh, you said, you know, I thought it would be good. Well, no. Everything but the everything. I'm going to use that just on the stairs. And what's the thing? I don't know. I never heard that. In the real building?
Okay.
The speaker's going on. I don't know.
Yes, don't.
Well, I don't know that I can tell you an awful lot about these offices that you guys don't already know, because you talk about these all the time, and Ginny's got her little book with all the facts about these offices already, so I'll just repeat a few of the tales, and maybe you've heard some of them before, and maybe you haven't. This was the formal office. This is not where he sat and did his work. Tommy Wilk told me that she would sometimes sit here on the desk with letters for him to sign during the day, anything that a member of the staff might have brought in, a photograph or a Disney book or something they wanted an autograph on, that would be left here on the desk too. And so he would come in here and use the desk for that reason. He also would greet his visitors in here. This was, as I said, the formal office, so it was the one where he had the places where visitors could be seated, and he could talk to them in here. The piano, of course, was not used by Walt himself, but the Sherman brothers and others of his musicians would occasionally play songs for him in here, and that was how the piano was used. Behind the desk here, you can see an example of some of Walt's miniature collection. This is something that got started in the 1940s and actually was one of the catalysts that got the whole idea for Disneyland going. He started this miniature collection before he really got going with his Disneyland plans, and once he did, he was trying to think of some way he could turn his collection into an attraction at Disneyland. And he was thinking of ways that you could have dioramas where people would actually look at room settings, and there would be a recorded voice that would tell you about what was going on in this cabin or whatever. And he even built one. He built Granny's Cabin, which was his first model that he created, and furnished it with all of his little miniature furniture. And it was actually displayed at a craft show that was held at the old Pan Pacific Auditorium down in Los Angeles. He at one time thought that there might be trucks that could go around the country and would have a series of these displays in them. And you'd have this diorama, and you would stand in front of it, and in the case of Granny's Cabin, you had Granny sitting in her rocking chair, and she would tell what life was like back in the 1860s or whatever was the era for this cabin, and point out some of the different things around the room. And he even got Beulah Bondi, who had starred in So Dear to My Heart, one of the early Disney features, to do the recording of Granny. Unfortunately, we've never been able to find this recording, so it doesn't seem to exist anymore, but it'd be a fun thing to find someday. But you can imagine what the problem would be with a series of dioramas like this. what is the capacity per hour? You get maybe, what, 3 or 4 people standing in front of this diorama, and there's your capacity. I mean, they can stand there for 5 or 10 minutes while she tells her little story, and then they can move on to the next diorama, and 4 more people can come up, but you really can't tell this story to very many people at a time. And so that's when he started expanding his ideas, and eventually we get Disneyland. And on some of the very first plans for Disneyland, what's there? Lilliputian Land, where he would have his miniatures on display. So he kept fighting to have a place for his miniatures, and of course it never happened. I don't know if it's still there, but Knott's Berry Farm always had a miniatures display.
I think they got rid of it.
Is it finally gone?
Yeah, the family finally took it out, and
It,
they're trying to put
it was
for
there
all
for
the-
years, and of course at the time that Walt was building Disneyland, he certainly would have been aware of the miniatures over at Knott's Berry Farm, and very possibly was trying to copy something that they had over there that was so successful. The portraits of Diane and Sharon back here, and these two, of course, are by Norman Rockwell. Not many people can get Norman Rockwell to do portraits of their children. We had the originals in the offices, of course, for many years, and eventually the girls wanted their own Norman Rockwell drawing, and I can't blame them in the slightest. And so we had reproductions made, and these are reproductions, so you don't have the original Norman Rockwell. That's Diane in her baby shoes. This is a Grumman Gulfstream II. This is a plane that the company actually had on order at the time of Walt's death, and Roy canceled the order after Walt died. It was Walt that was really interested in the airplanes, and Roy thought this was kind of an expense that we didn't really need to spend, so we didn't ever buy our Grumman Gulfstream. But there is a model in the other office of a plane that we did have.
Ship's bell?
What?
The ship's bell?
Oh, the ship's bell, the invisible ship's bell that is sitting right here on the desk. We used to have this, but it was an award, and it was one of the awards to Walt, and of course when we gave all the awards back to the family, that's one of the ones that went back. Tommy Wilt told me that when she started work, Walt asked her, when it's 12 o'clock and it's time for me to go to lunch, would you please come in here and ring this bell, and I'll be in the other office and I'll know that it's time for me to go to lunch. Well, she was a little timid about this, and she didn't think that he really meant she should ring it very loud, so she came in the first day and sort of tinkled the bell at 12 o'clock, and Walt came storming out of his office. He said, I want you to really ring this thing. And he clangs the bell. So from then on, she clanged the bell every time that it was time for Walt to go to lunch. On the windowsill there, you can see some animators' models. They call these maquettes today. Grab one to show you from Lady and the Tramp. The Siamese cats. Now, our model department, let me tell you something interesting. Our model department was started around 1938, right about the time we finished Snow White. We did a lot of models for Fantasia and Pinocchio. When the war came, we shut down the model department. When did we make Lady and the Tramp? 1955. When did we start working on Lady and the Tramp? Before 1941, because this was made by the model department during that early period. There's another, there's a lady over there too.
Now what is?
Put a model there from Fantasia, and of course Lampwick here from Pinocchio. The rest of them are pieces of, well, except for the cat over there, are pieces of Walt's miniature collection. People ask me all the time about the books along the wall, thinking that, oh, we can look at these books and this will tell us Walt's taste in reading. That's not true. Tommy told me that people would send Walt books all the time, and he didn't always even look at them. They just stick them up there on the shelf. Some of them were autographed. In fact, some of the more important ones we don't have up there. We kept them in the archives because there were books autographed by Upton Sinclair. I mean, he wrote the No-Mobile that we made into a movie. That was up there. There were some Mary Poppins books autographed by P.L. Travers to Walt. There was one of Richard Nixon's books autographed to Walt. So those things we've kept in the archives to use for displays. But generally all the rest of the books are up there, and it really doesn't tell us much about Walt's reading tastes. Though you can tell some things that he was interested in. I mean, there's a book on Salvador Dali up on the top shelf, and he was very interested in Dali and the whole surrealistic art movement, and worked with Dali on a film that we never completed, but at least he worked at the studio for several months in 1946. The models that are up there on top of the bookcase are essentially gifts that were given to Walt at various times during his career. I remember coming into this office the morning that we had the Sylmar earthquake, 1971 I think it was, and all of those had fallen off onto the floor, and they were all smashed. And we mended them all. I'd challenge you to find how they were broken. That white man there was the worst. I mean, he was in many pieces. But I think we did a pretty good job in getting him put back together again. I don't think any of you were here then, except maybe Bruce, but we had a fire just outside the office. I don't know, what, 7 or 8 years ago, I guess, something like that.
Is Jenny here in there and the sprinklers went off?
And the sprinklers went off in here, and I got a call from up at the studio, and we got everything wet in Walt Disney's offices. Would you come down and help us? So I came down here, and we spread out everything to dry. We had a room upstairs and back that we put the fans up there and had the windows all open and trying to dry out. You can see a lot of the books and the sheet music on the piano. You can see where they're water stained, and you can also see it on some of the upholstery where it's gotten water stained. The piano was practically ruined by the water. Hit the keys. I think, actually it's not too bad tune, but I think the insides were pretty well shot, and we did get them fixed. So I don't know why, since the thing never gets played in. But anyway, that was a messy period. And while we were in here, there were actually 2 of these Japanese Kabuki dancers, as you see here. I don't know if you can see them closely, and they've been a little damaged by the rain, but they are so finely painted. The other one had a white headdress, and it was just feathered at the ends of each line with real thin brush strokes, and it just looked like it was real fur. Even though it was ceramic, these things were absolutely gorgeous. Well, while we were cleaning up in here, one of the security hosts was in here, and he happened to lean over the table, and his radio fell off his belt and smashed it to smithereens. So we only have one left. The bird in the gilded cage there, of course, is what gave Walt the idea for audio animatronics figures. This one does not work because his grandkids broke it. There were actually 2 of these, and we have the other one up at the archives, and it still works. And we could use it for our orientations up there. Now, Bruce, can I have that photograph? Let me explain the wall there where the window is. This is what it looked like. In fact, probably be easier if I just passed this around. You can see where the couch is there. With the coffee table in front of it. You can probably see both the Kabuki figures there. Are they both there? The white-haired one? Yeah. And then the door there on that side that went out into the secretary's office.
Could you tell us a little bit about where Walt acquired the birdcage?
We know we got one of them in New Orleans when he was down there on a vacation trip. Whether he got them both there, I don't know.
What's the box on that?
It's a cigarette box, I think. I don't think there's anything in it.
Now, Walt was a smoker?
Walt was a heavy smoker and he died of lung cancer, so
What
that
was his
should be a
brand of
lesson to
cigarette?
you all. Pardon me?
What was his brand of cigarette?
Jetan, which was a French cigarette.
That was a good question.
Very good.
Chatan.
Gitanne. I asked Lucille Martin that question years and years ago.
Do you know how tall Walt was when he?
You know, that was one of the hardest things we ever had to discover. We had his passport, which gives his height as something like 5'6", but he was 16 years old at that time. I'd been asked that question many times. I was down here at the park for the retirement party for Wally Bogue that they held over in the Golden Horseshoe, and Lily was there. And I went up to her afterwards and I said, by the way, Lily, do you know how tall Walt was? We've been trying to figure that out. She didn't know. Can you imagine a wife not knowing how tall her husband was? Of course, he towered over her. She was very short. I mean, she was like 5'3" or something like that. So maybe she sort of purposely didn't think about how tall Walt was, but we've always assumed he was around 5'10". Between 5'8" and 5'10", somewhere around there.
Two questions about the piano, the Mouser and the Little Mermaid.
The Little Mermaid I have no information about whatsoever, except Walt did take a trip to Tivoli Gardens, and that was one park that really intrigued him and gave him some ideas for Disneyland. The Mouser there is the Disney equivalent of an Oscar, and was used by the executives at the company whenever they wanted to honor someone. And this was one that Roy gave to Walt. I don't think Walt ever gave Roy one, but there are a lot of other people within the company that have been given Mousers. And also occasionally they would be given to an actor that was here starring in a movie like Fred McMurray or something like that.
I saw a photograph of Louis Armstrong.
Yes, Louis Armstrong got a Mouser. We don't have a complete list of everybody that got a Mouser, but we do have a list, and there's I don't know, 50, 75 people on it. And we used that same statuette in 1973 when we had the 50th anniversary of the company. We had a special party for what we called our Hyperion Club. And this was all the people that were still working for the company, that had worked for the company when we were over on Hyperion Avenue. And that meant before 1940. And there were still, I don't know, 100, 150 people, ranging from ink and paint ladies to janitors to executives that were still around from the Hyperion days. And so they created a special Mouser for them and took a studio business card from the 1930s and reproduced that as the plaque with each one's name on it, and then the date of their hiring with the company. So everyone got one of those nice special Mousers that was in the Hyperion Club.
The question everyone hates to ask but wants to know.
Thanks,
Where is Walt buried?
Okay. Yeah, this, he was not frozen. And there is no evidence, despite what Ward Kimball says, that Walt even was interested in cryogenics. No one had been frozen by December of 1966. The first person who died and was then frozen happened, I don't know, the next year, I think. It just hadn't happened by the time Walt died. This rumor started 4 or 5 years later in some of the scandal magazines that you pick up at your newspaper checkout stand. And a lot of people believe it, but there's absolutely no truth to it. We have Walt's death certificate, and it clearly indicates that he was cremated. Bruce talked to was it you or your friend, talked to Diane,
To
or
Sharon.
who said that his ashes were scattered at sea. That's perfectly reasonable explanation. There is a plaque on a wall at Forest Lawn in Glendale, but there's no indication that there are any ashes stored within the wall or in the ground under it or anything like that. So that's very possible.
Dave, when you look
I
around-
know that Sharon's ashes were strewn over in Hawaii.
Right, she said
died.
scattered in paradise.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to ask about, if you could tell us a story about the crystal coach back there on the miniature show.
It was made by the glass blowers here at Disneyland and given to Walt. And when we were moving it, I unpacked the box, and it was in many pieces. And I carried the box down to the glass blower, and I said, is there any way that this could be fixed? And within a day, he handed that thing back to me in beautiful shape. So I was so amazed that he was able to put that thing back together again. But I don't know when it was given to Walt, but obviously sometime between 1955 and 1966. Yeah.
Now, I've heard a story about this desk in Steamboat Willie.
Let's tell about the script.
2000.
Oh, the script, the script. Oh, yes. One thing that I had been told when I came here was that Walt was not interested in the history of the company or in his history. That when he made a film like Snow White, he never saw the film again. I mean, he was always moving on to his next project. I mean, we go see these films all the time. Now we have them on video and watch them all the time. But he was never interested in something. Once it was done, it was done. And he would go on to the next thing. And it was my feeling that he never would have started an archives. I mean, that wasn't something that he would have been interested in doing. And so when I was doing my inventory of this desk, I was so surprised to open the drawer, and there at the bottom of the drawer was the original script for Steamboat Willie. Now, for someone that was not interested in his history, here he's keeping this little icon of, of the birth of his most famous character in his desk drawer. So that told me that he really did think something of his history. Yeah.
Are those also Diane's baby shoes, the bookends right behind you? Or those Sharon's?
Don't know for sure. They're not labeled, and I've never known. Oops. Whatever that is.
What is this cabinet back here?
It's a larger size, so I wouldn't be surprised if these were also Diane's.
What is this?
Oh, this cabinet here, I'm going to come right up to your camera here. If you see, well, that's not a good one. Open that one over there. It just snaps open. You see all the shelves inside? Those were for scripts. So all of the various projects that he was working on would have each have an individual shelf, and the same was in this cabinet over here. And I think there's some of them still labeled over there, right?
Yes.
Hercules.
Hercules. Hello. It's amazing how we never forget anything in this company.
Dave, you said that a lot of these books were not his personal taste. He
Right.
didn't purchase them. But we know the miniature collection was his. If
Right.
you look around this office and also the other office, how much of this was his personal taste that he would have chosen? I mean, like the furniture, the desk.
Well, he certainly liked the style of furniture. He hired an architect who was not highly regarded in those days. His name was Kem, K-E-M, not Ken, Kem Weber, W-E-B-E-R, to design the studio. Weber was a proponent of a style called Art Moderne. And this was something modern in those days. There were very few buildings that had been designed in that style. And so Walt hired him to design the studio. Now, this is not very different from Michael Eisner hiring Michael Graves and Stern and some of the other architects that he's hired that are doing architecture that's not quite the norm of the day. Not only did Weber design the studio, but he designed a lot of the furniture in the studio. So this is a Kem Weber chair. This is a Kem Weber desk. He liked to use the flowing curves. So you see that both in the design of the animation building at the studio and in a lot of the furniture that you see around the studio. So, I mean, this coffee table is a Kem Weber. That corner piece is a Kem Weber. He designed all the furniture within the offices as well as the buildings in which they were placed. Oh, I was talking about these pictures outside the wall. These backdrops are actually the ones that were used at the studio when they filmed Walt in his office. That was never his office. They would build an office out on the sound stage when he was introducing his television shows, and they would have this outside the window. And so we were no longer needing it by the time we decided to build the Walt Disney story here at Disneyland. So the backdrop migrated down here. So that obviously is the animation building, and Walt could never have seen that outside his window.
Can you see his office?
Well, as I said, this isn't quite, they cut it wrong. So, I mean, it would be down at that end, but that's not it. So, I think they've sort of put together pieces of a photograph here. It's not quite to scale.
Dave, what did Walt see out of his office?
He looked down directly from this window. He would look down on the Ink and Paint building, which was the next building over. From the window on that side of that room, he looked down into the E-wing, and if he looked down into the second floor E-wing, that was Roy's office. So he could look down into Roy's office. So Roy couldn't see him.
In old photographs, I've seen pictures of a statue very similar to the Mousker, only it's Donald Duck.
Yes, there was a Duckster also.
Which is rare.
The duck probably wasn't used as much as the Mickey, but the Mickey is more valuable when it turns up on the market because people like Mickey Mouse.
Mm-hmm.
But the duck probably was not given as much. If it was someone that had worked a lot with the duck, like Carl Barks, who did a lot of the Donald Duck comics, he was given a Duckster, not a Mousker, when they wanted to honor him. So they used them interchangeably, just depending on maybe even the personality of the person they were giving it to.
Are there any Disney pieces, objects, or artifacts in the Smithsonian? Anything that was personally Walt's?
No. We donated some drawings from Steamboat Willie, which they have there. They have one of in their National Air and Space Museum, they have one of the space stations from our Man in Space shows. Other than that, we've loaned them things occasionally for temporary exhibits, but I don't think they have anything else in their permanent collection.
Dave, do we have anything as far as the first drawing that he did on the train?
That's a myth. He may have given some original thought to what he was going to do after Oswald on that train, but it's doubtful that he drew anything at all. He got back to Hollywood totally disheartened because he'd lost the character of Oswald to his distributor. He knew that they had to come up with something else for a series of cartoons. And I spoke with Ub Iwerks. Ub Iwerks was still alive when I started with the company. He died in 1971. He was the one that drew Mickey Mouse for Walt Disney. And Ub was a very quiet, unassuming, modest person. And I really believed what he told me about this whole episode. And he's the one that explained that Walt came back not knowing which way to turn. He sat down with Ub and a couple of the other loyal artists that they had working with them, and they started throwing around ideas of different things that they might work with. And it was out of that meeting that the whole idea of the mouse came. And so Ub picked up his pencil and started sketching this. Walt was behind him over his shoulder saying, no, make the ears a little bigger, no, do this, do that. And that's where Mickey was created. Actually, if you take a look at Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, which is the character that Walt had just before Mickey, which was also designed by iWorks, and you take this rabbit and take off the long ears and you put round ears on his head, you practically got Mickey Mouse. So they did not work very hard to come up with a new character. It's probably a myth that he
So you
drew
don't think
anything
that
on
he
the
showed it
thing.
to Lillian?
He told the story himself. I mean, he loved to embroider on history
I see.
and explain the various ways that Mickey was created, and he'd tell stories about a little mouse that he had on his drawing board in Kansas City, and so I mean, there's a lot of myth behind all of this. There's a lot of legend behind all of this. I don't change all the publicity department's press releases if they're going to talk about the train, and I'll let them do it because Walt did it himself, but it's probably not true.
Is the legend true that Walt wanted to name the mouse Mortimer and Lillian came up with the name Mickey?
I asked her that many, many years ago, and she didn't remember that.
Oh my
So,
goodness.
I mean,
Uh-oh.
but then again, it very well could be
It's a
true.
good story.
Yeah.
Dave, is there that mask over by the Japanese doll? Is that the Lincoln?
I think that's the Lincoln. Well, it's taken from the death mask. It's too small for a model of his head, I think. We have, by the way, in the archives, and this is really eerie. When my secretary first opened the box, here were Walt's hands. There were these plaster casts made of Walt's hands, and here I got these two hands, sort of like in this position, cut off right here, made out of a sort of a waxy yellow tan colored material, and it's eerie looking. We've never put those on display.
Is the hand out there in that animation case, is that Walt's or Lincoln?
That's Lincoln.
When the Lincoln exhibit was being planned or discussed or built, what was the Illinois state involvement? Did they just contract?
Well, this was done for the New York World's Fair. The Abraham Lincoln figure was actually created for the New York World's Fair for a pavilion that was sponsored by the state of Illinois. When we brought Lincoln back to Disneyland after the fair, of course, the state of Illinois did not want to sponsor an attraction in California. They had no reason to. And so we had to look elsewhere for sponsors, and Lincoln Savings and Loan was an obvious one for a number of years. Gulf Oil, of course, too, when we first opened the Walt Disney Story. Of course, when we first opened the Walt Disney Story, we took Lincoln out, and we had the film of Walt's life showing in that theater. And you wouldn't believe the number of people that complained because Lincoln wasn't there anymore. So after a few years, we brought him back.
Was that due to the opening of Walt Disney World? There's some confusion as to whether or not
No.
that's why we
It
took
really
out
didn't.
Lincoln.
It didn't have any reason.
But we did send it to Florida.
There were a number of different Lincoln figures, so I mean they could have kept it here just as easily. And of course they built the whole Hall of Presidents for Walt Disney World, so what's building one more?
Well, we have guests who often insist that they saw the Hall of Presidents
Yeah.
here,
Oh.
that all kinds of different stories.
Well, people are notorious at misremembering things.
Insisting on those.
What was the name of the artist that did the original sketches for Little Mermaid?
Kai Nielsen.
How do you spell
Kai,
that?
K-A-Y-N-E-I-L-S-E-N. Pronounced Kai, not K. He was a Swedish artist, very well known for his book illustrations. His most famous book is a book of fairy tales called East of the Sun and West of the Moon. He didn't write it, but he illustrated the most famous edition of that. And you see that very often at antiquarian book fairs, quite expensive. But he's quite well known as a book illustrator. But he worked for the studio for 4 or 5 years probably, in the late 30s and early 40s. A lot of his designs were used as a concept for the Night on Bald Mountain sequence of Fantasia. That was very much his style. And he did at that time a lot of early sketches for The Little Mermaid, which we of course didn't make for 40 years. When they decided to make The Little Mermaid, they came to the archives and studied these sketches that Nielsen had made many years earlier, and they were so impressed by them and they made such an impact on them that they gave him a credit on the film. So if you look in the credits for The Little Mermaid, 1989, it credits Kai Nielsen, who's been dead for 20 or 30 years. There's a new book out, should be hitting the stores very soon. I think it's called The Art of the Little Mermaid. It's not done in the large size as we've done all of our recent art books. This one is in the little pocket size, but it is an original, and this is the only way it has been published, and probably the only way it will be published. So if you want a book on the art of the Little Mermaid, you might want to get that when it comes out. It's only $10.95, cheap.
I have a question. I was wondering, is there any engraved cornerstone in any of the buildings within Disneyland? Sort of, not exactly like our time capsule, but something along those lines, something maybe with the date or initials or something, a cornerstone, maybe City Hall or the castle and all. So a lot of guests ask that question, and I just...
No, and there's none at the studio either, really.
Make work,
Yeah, really. So Dave, what's
Shall we
actually...
move to the...
yeah,
oh, go ahead.
And I was going to say, what's actually in the desk now?
Well, I don't think we've left anything in the drawers. We've got those in boxes at the archives. Anything that wasn't going to be in view, I think the drawers are all empty. Yeah, there's nothing in the drawers. Anything that wasn't going to be in view, we didn't leave in the cupboards or in the desks, because we thought, well, we might want to use it someday for display or something. So that's all at the archives now.
Did the building have any suggestions or wants or anything when they were setting up this?
No.